Hello, my name is Andrew Hart and I'm the Head of Advanced Research at SBD. And we're going to use this webinar to talk through some of the results of a recent study that we've completed looking at the telematics market in Southeast Asia and specifically what kind of services consumers might need. Before I start, I'd like to quickly share some experiences about how not to conduct market research in these markets. The traditional approach to doing research would be to ask consumers, do you want service X for your next car? Would you like eCall? Would you like bCall? The problem with this approach is that customers in these markets typically don't have any experience of eCall or bCall or any other telematics service. So what you end up with are very questionable results that are likely to overstate the interest that consumers have. Additionally, this kind of study wouldn't necessarily explain why consumers might want certain types of services. So at SBD we've tried a different approach of trying to understand in more detail what types of personalities people in these markets have, how do they think, how do they behave, how do they act, and what kind of situations do they face, what kind of environment are they faced with. And we've done the study in two parts. The first is a very Japanese approach of Genchi Genbutsu, which means literally go and see. So we have visited Southeast Asia, spent lots of time there discussing with key stakeholders and members of the public what they need and understanding why they need certain types of services. In parallel, we've done a more statistical analysis. We surveyed around 2,400 recent car buyers in Thailand, Indonesia and Malaysia. And the way in which we did this wasn't to simply ask them, do you want eCall? Instead, we presented each one of these respondents with opposing pairs of statements and asked them to choose between them. By finding out which of those statements people sided with, we were able to aggregate these results and analyze which types of services will be most attractive based on personality and situational analysis. So let's go through some of the results now, and I've broken it down into different areas of technology, safety, environment, socializing, traffic and navigation. If we start with technology, and it's clearly one of the most tech-savvy regions in the world, and the smartphone in particular is one of the most attractive devices that consumers can have. When asked to choose between these two statements, 80% identified positively towards smartphones across every subgroup, whether they be young Thai males or older Indonesian females. People always like to have the latest smartphones. And this reflects the fact that the overall penetration for smartphones is very, very high across these markets. Across Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand, people generally have a lot more smartphones. And what we found from our survey was that smartphone penetration amongst recent car buyers is particularly high. On average, between 80 and 90% of new car buyers are likely to own smartphones. And this reflects also the fact that smartphones aren't just a nice-to-have device. They are the primary gateway that people use to access the internet. Internet availability at home through fixed broadband lines is extremely low across all three of these markets. So the smartphone is really the only way in which many people have to access online services. If we move across to safety, and we have the unfortunate statistic that all three of these markets, Indonesia, Thailand and Malaysia, rank in the top 20 worst markets for road deaths. In total, in 2011, around 50,000 people lost their lives in these countries. And this isn't a situation that's getting better. When we asked respondents to identify with these two statements, is driving becoming safer each year, or is driving becoming more dangerous each year, every subgroup responded that driving is becoming more and more dangerous. And this is something that people within those markets understand very well. This is a quote from an Indonesian lawmaker who said that if nothing is done, by 2020 the accidents and death-related accidents will soar to 65,000 and a huge cost to society at large. Moving across to the environment, and this was one of the more surprising results of our survey. When asked whether which of these statements reflected their personal opinions, the vast majority of respondents believed that reducing man's impact on the environment should be a top priority for everyone. This is expected to be higher than in other markets. And if we try to understand why people reacted so positively towards this comment, we can look at this statement by the Asian Development Bank that says that adopting a similar modelling approach to that used by the 2007 Stern Review, this report concludes that Southeast Asia is twice as economically vulnerable to climate change compared to the rest of the world. So Southeast Asia is really at the forefront of the markets that are going to be damaged by global warming. So it's understandable that some of this concern will filter down to consumers. Another factor why consumers are worried about the environment is also rapidly rising fuel prices. As governments have cut back on some of the subsidies for fuel in these markets, fuel prices have gone up dramatically in the last 10 years. So consumers are generally more interested in saving energy, more interested in the environment, and this could also affect some of their needs for telematics services in the car. Moving on to socializing, and certainly from the results that we found, this was one of the most sociable regions in the world, with generally people really relating to the comment of social networking sites becoming the primary online communication tool across all subgroups. And you can see this also from the statistics of the number of Facebook and Twitter users and how that's grown. Indonesia is now the 4th largest Facebook community in the world. And Thailand and Malaysia are also in the top 20, with huge proportions of the populations using these social networking sites. For Twitter, Indonesia is the 5th largest Twittering community in the world. And what we found from our survey was that it's not only these big international names that are popular within these countries. There are also a lot of domestic social networking sites that are extremely important. In Indonesia we have Koprol, which is widely used on a weekly basis by a huge proportion of the respondents. In Malaysia and Thailand we have other domestic solutions. So when developing in-car social networking based telematics services, it's important to recognize that there are need for domestic solutions, not just the big international names like Facebook and Twitter. So moving across to traffic, and this graph just really shows the size of the problem. There are 565 new cars and 3,006 new motorcycles driven on Jakarta's roads each day. So the saturation of traffic is really reaching a breaking point. And the cost is huge. The cost to Jakarta alone is expected to be around 12.8 trillion rupees, around 1.1 billion euros. And how are drivers managing this? Well, not particularly easy. We asked respondents how they currently check for traffic information. Around 67% of Indonesians still rely on basic radio services to check for traffic alerts. 58% of Thai respondents typically check for traffic conditions online before leaving home. And generally, Malaysians were the least likely to access traffic information on a regular basis across any platform. This is just an anecdote really of a trip that we took to Indonesia, and when we were talking to a taxi driver there, he explained that traffic is so unpredictable that even if he did know ways to get around, there simply aren't any by-roads to avoid the congestion. So everyone is getting filtered through the same tight roads and getting stuck in the same traffic. As a side story, this is the same taxi driver who had a 3G Samsung tablet attached to his windscreen, which he was using throughout the journey to access Facebook and to message one of his 1,000 Facebook friends that he claimed to have. So extremely popular taxi driver. So moving across to navigation, and from the survey results we can see that smartphone navigation is by far the most common solution being used by drivers. It's the first experience that the vast majority of consumers will have of any kind of navigation, which is very different to Europe and USA, where perhaps PNDs or OE navigation systems became more common before smartphone navigation was launched. And you can see why this is happening when you look at the big players like Nokia, Apple and Android. All of them have either already launched some form of smartphone navigation, or they're planning on launching some form in the next year or so. So this is a huge number of free navigation systems that's been shipped. We estimate that in 2012, around 10 million navigation-enabled smartphones will be shipped across these three markets. So that's the big story about what's happening across these different areas. But what does this mean about the different types of services that consumers need? Well, based on the survey that we conducted, we've classified the high priority, medium priority and lower priority services into these groups for each market. And I'm going to go through each one just to explain some of the unique differences. If we jump to Malaysia, one of the interesting trends was a huge demand for stolen vehicle tracking in that country. And that reflects the fact that there's a massive vehicle theft problem. Looking at things like location-based services adverts, things like vouchers that are based around shops nearby, for the most part it was a medium priority for most consumers, but within certain subgroups it was more popular. So if you look at the young mothers who are looking for bargains and the young people who are looking to save some money in general, these kind of services could be more attractive to them. B-call, breakdown assistance call, was generally considered to be a lower priority by almost all of the respondents, except for one particular subgroup. Young female drivers, particularly in Thailand, were more and more concerned about their cars breaking down, so they showed a greater potential interest in this type of service. So there might be some opportunity to develop a low-cost B-call application for young women in Thailand. Fun driving apps, which are things like the BMW solution where you can see the performance of your car through an app, were generally viewed more as a racer boy feature for young males rather than something that would appeal to many types of drivers. And then there was points of interest input. One of the big problems across all of these markets is that navigation systems are very difficult to input destinations on, because the address system isn't necessarily very mature. So there could be a very big need for a simplified points of interest destination input solution across all of these markets. So at a high level, that's what we can deduce from some of these results. As a final thought, we want to point out that Southeast Asia will need to be different when considering telematics. First-generation strategies across markets such as Europe, US and China have been heavily focused on what we call heavy telematics, very embedded solutions with very big IT infrastructure in the background supporting them. In Southeast Asia, we think there's a different approach that's needed, something that's lighter, potentially more based on smartphone apps. We think there's a need for faster-to-market solutions that can address immediate problems, pains that drivers are already facing, like high fuel prices. We think it needs to be less of a tick box approach to services, more focused on identifying unique needs for certain subgroups and trying to solve those problems. And across the board, this will require a very proactive approach to developing partnerships. It's important to understand who are the key local players within these countries. And these are all answers that we're providing as part of our research into Southeast Asia. A quick note about SPD. SPD is a specialist market research and consultancy company focused on three core areas: safe car, connected car and secure car. Safe car are areas such as ADAS systems, connected car is more about telematics, and secure car is more about how to keep the car from being accessed by thieves through immobilizers or other such technologies. Our services cover the whole range from information about latest industry trends to research services such as analytical reports and databases and end-user surveys, more through to the consulting services such as competitor benchmarking, partner sourcing and strategic advice. And across this, we're helping you develop innovative technologies. And finally, we have teams in Europe and across Japan, with our Japanese team particularly focusing on telematics in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. So if you have any questions about our research, please let us know.